Hello and welcome to another Monday night Q&A. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Dan Smith, one of our regional engineering managers. How's your Monday been, Dan?
Good, Sam. Good, yeah. Busy, just been crazy. But no, it's really good. Got a lot of exciting things going on at the moment at Search or NICIC Alexa. So yeah, all good. Just crazy busy emails, phone calls, etc. How about yourself?
Yeah. It sounds like a normal Monday. Everything going off plan straight away from 9 o'clock. So yeah, no, it was good. It was good. Keeps us alive.
Exactly.
So this is the second live Q&A session of the year. So I'll just run you through a few house rules. We start off with your question of the week, which we posted out earlier across social media channels earlier today. So we'll go through our answer to that question. Then while you're putting your questions in the chat, we'll go through some questions from the previous session that we didn't get round to answering. So please put your questions in the chat, remembering there's no such thing as a stupid question, only stupid answers. So please post any questions that you've got. Please remember to be respectful to each other in chat, as the whole idea of this evening is that collectively we help each other with the aim of improving our collective knowledge and our understanding of all things associated with 7671 and the world of electrical installations. So without any further ado, we'll take a look at what was this week's question of the week. I'll just post that up for the viewers. So today's question of the week was: to comply with BS 7671, should the RCD for a 32 amp rated socket outlet incorporated in an electric vehicle charging point provide protection for fault only, additional only, fault and additional, or neither fault or additional? So what's our thoughts on that one, Dan?
Okay, Sam. So let's break this one down. I think two parts. That will give you an idea of the answer. First of all, you alluded in the question that it's a 32 amp rated socket outlet. So we should straight away, regulation 411.3.3. Obviously, additional protection is required from our RCDs. We know additional protection. Yes, great. Now, if you go to section 722, electric vehicle charging, you'll notice that the word additional protection actually isn't mentioned in that section. However, what is mentioned is regulation 722.531, which does give an indication. It says about RCDs, and it's for devices for protection against electric shock, against ADS, basically. And an important little statement in there: unless supplied by a circuit using the protective measure of electrical separation, each charging point incorporating a socket outlet or vehicle connected to comply with BSEN 62196 series shall be protected by an RCD having a rated residual current not exceeding 30 milliamps. And it's that part where it's unless supplied for electrical separation. Therefore, the intent would be more that it's there for protection against ADS and therefore fault protection. So the answer is actually both. Is actually C, which is fault and additional protection, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we get, like you say, we get a couple of keys or hints, and that would be where I think, so one of the things is always look at the regulations. So in the special location regulation, this one's in section 722, so the reg starts with 722, but then 531, so it points us to where in the normal part of 7671, in parts 1 to 6, that would come in. And so if we looked in section 531, that's for devices for protection against electric shock by automatic disconnection of supply. So as you say, there's your fault protection. And then even though it's in special location section, we've still got to consider parts 1 to 6. Sometimes people often forget that, and they focus in on the requirements within the special location section, and they forget that we've actually still got to comply with all of the relevant parts of parts 1 to 6. So very important to consider those as well.
Yes, it's a good point, Sam, as well. I think, when you look at special locations, obviously it's there, it's an enhanced measure for, increased perceived electric shock, for example, risk. But again, you adding to that to parts 1 to 6 is additional to those parts. And try not to sort of, separate the two. You've got special locations, but you've still always got parts 1 to 6, and it's like a bolt on. That's how I like to think about, special locations generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Also, so one more thing to that as well. If you are doing an installation set, obviously, because it is obviously there for addition and fault on your schedule respected items, obviously you would therefore tick both as well for those purposes.
Yeah. No, it's very good point, because we did get a few people in response to the question say, well, what does it matter? And that's one of the reasons why it matters, because then we have to complete our installation certificate or our condition report appropriately. So then we need to decide, well, what are we going to suggest that the protective device function is, and what values are we going to record, and what tests are we going to do. So we need to understand the functionality that it's going to provide first, so that we can correctly record its characteristics on our installation certificate. Okay, so some of the questions that were hanging over from previous sessions. We'll take one that says, I know there are no distances for a socket outlet from a sink, but what are the regulations which refer to this situation? So one of the old stalwarts on the helpline, socket outlet distance from a sink. What's our thoughts there, Dan?
You can try searching that blue book of yours, but you ain't going to find much regards to that. But obviously, one thing to consider, you've got, for example, regulation 51221, which gets you to think about taking account of external influences. So BS1363 socket outlet should ideally be, at least a metre away. However, this may be impractical in a lot of installations, especially commercial, little commercial tea points or kitchens, etc. But we would still recommend a minimum distance of 300 mil. But this is where the designer's really got an important part to play. And if it is, less than a metre, for example, the designer may wish to carry out a risk assessment due to that increased risk of splashing. Therefore, they can explore other types of socket outlets, such as like a BSEN 60309, where maybe the ingress protection is higher, such as IPX4, IPX5. So just gets you thinking about risk assessments, likelihood. Again, if it is impractical, but you will not find a defined distance within the BSM-71, which actually says you'll find guidance on that, but in the BSM-71 you won't find any specified value as such.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got that section 528, which covers proximity with electrical and non-electrical services, and we've got some of our fundamentals which talk about everything we install has to either be suitable for the environment, or the way we install it makes it suitable. So those are the regs that we'd be looking for compliance in that situation. Okay, when installing an earth electrode in a TT earthing system, do I need to use a dedicated earth electrode tester to measure the earth's electrode resistance to earth? So do I need a dedicated earth electrode tester?
Well, to answer that, so you refer to regulation 64372, it does state that where an earthing system incorporates an earth electrode as part of the installation, the electrode resistance to earth shall be measured. However, there is an informative note to the regulation that does state where the measurement of RA is not practical, the measure value of the external fault loop impedance may be used. So the answer is actually no to that question. Yeah,
and there may be instances where you might have to do the groundwork associated with earth electrodes before the supply comes in, and then you would be forced to use a dedicated earth electrode tester. But if you have got the supply available, you can use your standard earth fault loop tester to make the measurement. Another one that's very common, particularly in our social housing forums, what do I do if I need to test a property but there's no credit on the metered supply, and therefore I cannot do any live testing?
So this is a good one, Sam. Does happen. I'm sure there's many out there that have been faced with exactly the same situation. Obviously, we'd always recommend that the arrangements are made to have the supply available for testing purposes. Obviously, we all know that live testing is an essential part of establishing whether an installation is a satisfactory condition for continual service, and obviously which is obviously the purpose of an periodic inspection. It will be necessary to complete certain live tests to be completed with the supply available before, in order to really truly indicate that the installation is safe. If you were doing an EICR, for example, and the supply wasn't there, you'd really want to document this, and documentation is key, and I can't stress it enough. to have it clearly documented on the EICR as limitations, exactly what's going on, but equally that even if you cannot do the full range of testing because the supply isn't available, that you strongly recommend that you do come back and you do go and obviously retest so you can get the dead testing part done first if you like, but then we'd always recommend that you probably want to go back to finish off to verify the supply is sound, etc., and all your values are good.
Yeah, absolutely, and we get that we get the question a lot, and I think on the technical helpline our response always includes the fact that this isn't really a technical question. It's not a 7671 issue. It's more about ways of working for your organisation, in that you might need to develop a procedure internally of how are you going to do this. Do you continue with your dead tests only and then come back at a later date when the supply's been installed, because that will save you time then for when the supply is installed? Or do you have a method of providing additional credit? I don't know whether that's cards or whether it's an arrangement with your energy provider. But yeah, have a think about sorting that out within the organisations. Take it up the tree, as they say, to sort of say this is something that you're going to meet on a weekly basis, and you need to have a procedure, a way of working to come around it. But as you say, ultimately, if you want, our recommendation is you want to confirm that it's satisfactory for continued use. You need to do some live testing. Strictly speaking, in accordance with 7671, you can have limitations as long as they're agreed and documented, and the customer is aware of the impact of those limitations, because it won't therefore give them a full picture. So yeah, important things to consider.
That's a really good point you make there, Sam, as well, about making the customer aware of the implications, because we have to just in a way take a step back sometimes when we're in our electrician head and we're going through things, we're talking to the clients, we almost don't mean to, but we automatically assume that they know what you're talking about using abbreviations, terminology, but sometimes they won't know. So it is relaying that information verbally, written down as well, so they are clearly exactly know what the implications are. So it's a really, really good point you raised.
Okay, we'll start looking. So we've just got one more there from last. Are the requirements for supporting cables against premature collapse applicable to data and telecommunication cables? So again, another common question.
Yeah, I've had this on site for many years where I've had arguments with people and data cables, they don't cover it. They are. If you refer to Regulation 521.10.202, it will say the wording wiring systems shall be supported such that they will not be liable to premature collapse in event of fire. So it's intended to cover all wiring systems. The informative note again does sort of confirm the intent of that regulation as well, including consideration of the possible hindrance of evacuation and firefighting activities by the wiring systems, which could prematurely collapse. But again, more importantly, if you go to very important, again, overlooked part of the regulation, Sam, part 1, you got regulation 110.1.2, and under indent 5. You'll see that the regulations include requirements for fixed wiring for information and communication technology, signalling, control, and the like. So it does say that in there, under the main scope of it.
No, it's spot on, and it's back at our fundamental principles in Chapter 1. It's included in the scope, so that means the premature collapse requirement, the additional protection when buried in the wall requirement, all those requirements are relevant to telecoms and data cable, just as much as they are to our standard LV 230 volt cabling systems. So yeah, absolutely relevant.
I think as well with this something, because it's always baffled me when people have always argued against that, it does include it. It's the wiring system. If anything, what I've learned on site, especially commercially, that if there was a fire, generally there's bundles and there's hundreds of them, thousands of the cables. You know what I mean? Whereas you might have one big armoured cable, some normal LV power, but with data, it's the same risk, if not more, sometimes. So again, of course you have to. Again, you just have to think it's a wiring system.
Yeah.
We're not talking about 230 volts at a time when we say wiring system. So
yeah, no, and it's very true. If we come out of domestic land and go into commercial, you can quite often have, there are more data cables and telecoms cables than there are 230 volt cables. So absolutely. And I think sometimes that's where people perhaps have that sort of break, that they think, well, normally they're installed by others, so they must have their own rules and regulations. Well, no, it comes under BS 7671. Okay, first question that's come in tonight. Good evening, thank you. I have a Luden Palazol 100 amp fuse switch. The BSEN reference is 61439-3. Can't see this on the options on the online certification list. Also, the fuses supplied are 22mm by 58mm with an IEC reference 60269-2, also GG. Do they need a BSEN number, or do I throw them away and get some with a BSEN reference? Thanks. So first of all, your switch fuse reference, that would appear correct. That's the right British standard European norm for a switch fuse. So I'm surprised if that's not on the drop down. So we'll take that on board and perhaps have a look at that ourselves. With regard to fuses, 7671 does say, so long as they've got a British or harmonised standard, which an IEC reference would be, that they can be used or could be selected for use. So no, I don't think you'd necessarily have to throw them away, but you might need to go back to the original manufacturer just to get a little bit more data. So if you're looking at characteristics, things like braking capacity, rating, let through energy, that kind of information you would need to know if it's an upfront device that you want to make sure is suitable. But yeah, if it's got an IEC reference, that's acceptable because that's considered a recognised standard. So yeah, get some more information about their characteristics just to confirm that it's the right type of device for what you're using it for. But yeah, it doesn't have to be replaced with a BSEN equivalent. Would you add anything to that, Dan?
Say manufacturer every time. A lot of the time, we live in a world of the internet and of Google, and the information is at our fingertips a lot of the time. And there's a lot of information out there if you search for it, and it could just be a simple phone call, or you could probably download the PDF data sheet directly, and you can get the information there. So yeah, 100% just go to manufacturer data sheet every time, and that will give you a lot more information, because the BSM one it can't cover every single other standard. That's what the other standards are there for. It can relate to other standards, but again, it's not on any real detail with those standards, because the book will be thousands of pages long. So
yeah. Another question: does the NIC have any guidance on definition of BNO from DNO? This is in relation to submains, flats, high rise. I'm not aware of anything that we've got publicised, but there's certainly information out there on the DNO site. So I know, for example, the area I'm in is UK Power Networks, and they've got some very good freely available literature on BNO. In a nutshell, going back to sort of the good old days of the 70s and 80s, the DNO would do the internal distribution within large properties, so blocks of flats, etc. As well as bringing the supply into the building, they would do the internal distribution within the building to each of the flats or users. Some time ago, they've decided to divorce that from their responsibility, and their responsibility now as standard ends at the first service head of the supply into the building, and then the internal distribution actually becomes the responsibility of the building owners, who can in some instances employ the DNO to look after it, but can also employ a third party subcontractor to act as what they call the BNO, the building network operator. So effectively then they would look after all of the internal distribution within that installation. So that's in a nutshell where it's from. But I would look at the DNO literature, because for want of a better phrase, BNO is something that the DNOs have created. It's like a subset of their responsibility. So it's really their definition. But I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure which part of the country you're in, but if you find out and go to your DNO, search for that, and I'm pretty sure they'll have a document explaining the roles and responsibility of a BNO. If you can't find it within your area, certainly look for the UK Power Networks version of the document. Add anything to that, Dan?
No, I've got the same document you're referring to. It's a really good document, to be fair. So I haven't seen nothing specifically that goes in as much detail as what the UKPN document does. But as you say, depending on the area, find out who your DNO is, contact them. I'm sure they'll be able to help and provide you a lot more information.
Yeah. So I don't think there's any NRC literature out there, but then thinking about it, because that's on the distribution side rather than the installation side, I can understand that we wouldn't really cover it, but we may have covered it in a definition in one of the Connections magazines, but it's not ringing any bells, to be honest.
The only thing you might be able to look at is, I know I don't know if we still say it anymore, we've done a book on submains. I don't know if that relates to it in any way, shape or form. You know, remember what I'm talking about, Sam?
Yeah, the thin little series.
That's right, yeah.
All right.
Again, off the top of my head, I wouldn't know if it's in there, but that's saying that might make reference to it. It might not. As I say, the DNO is really the people you want to go to.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of information out there. So.
Yeah, but we'll have a little look. If we have got something, then we'll post it out on social media in the next week with a reference of where we've got it from. Okay, another question from the audience. If a consumer unit needs upgrading, as the existing board is with pull-out fuses, and the gas is bonded but the water stopcock in the kitchen is not, I have explained that the water pipe requires an earth cable, but she doesn't want cabling trunking on her walls and the floors are concrete. What is the situation with this? Can I install a board without this earth cable or not to the water pipe in the kitchen? Okay, so I think we're talking about a bonding situation here. So if that first thing is verify that water service pipe work coming into the property is extraneous. So it's going to be conductive. It's going to have contact with true earth or another potential source outside, and it could then, because it's conductive, bring that potential into your property where you're trying to create an equipotential zone. So if it is extraneous, and there are some tests you can do to confirm it, then it would need bonding. And one of our golden rules, my personal favourite regulation, if you can have such a thing, 132.16, no additions or alterations without ensuring that the existing installation is adequate for those changes that you're going to make, in particular the earthing and bonding arrangements. So no, we wouldn't be able to comply with 7671 and do our consumer unit upgrade if the water pipe needed bonding and it wasn't bonded. Some other alternatives, if these are more practical, box in the water pipe work so that it's not accessible. Probably not practical because it's going to pop up everywhere, and certainly the taps that are connected to it or possibly connected to it are going to be accessible. So perhaps might not be able to make it inaccessible, but then perhaps another option would be for employ a plumber to provide a plastic insert large enough to create then on the other side of the insert, although we would have copper pipe work, it would be isolated copper and wouldn't be able to bring in a potential from outside because it's insulated from outside by that insulating plastic section of pipe work. So yeah, you've either got to bond it or you've got to isolate it so that it's not an extraneous conductive part anymore before you can proceed with that consumer unit change, I'm afraid. Anything you'd add to that, Dan?
As you say, bond it if it's extraneous, make it inaccessible, take the need away from it, or the insulating section would be good. If depending on where you place the insulating section, you might have to box in the part that maybe is extraneous. Then after the insulating section, again, you can touch it, and it's obviously completely isolated from the general mass of Earth, isn't it? So, they're your options. Yeah.
So another question: 7 structural steel columns within an office block. independently test out as extraneous. I'm planning to take 25mm bonding conductor to the first one of them, having 2 lugged connections at each column, therefore being looped to each one. My question would bonding conductor need to be unbroken? I know with pipework it states continuous, however with steel is it acceptable to have 2 lug connections as a permanent fixture? Okay, so 25mm tells me that we're not in, well, first of all you need to size it correctly, so either we're in TT or TNS land, in which case 25mm is the largest. If we are in PME, then just check that based on the size of your neutral, 25mm is large enough. Pardon me. And then the principle is, when we talk about service pipe work, we talk about if you are going to connect one extraneous conductive part to another, it should be a continuous connection, because the service provider, i.e. the water service or the gas service, may remove their middle pipe, and then you would lose the ongoing connection if it were cut and joined by that pipe work, because you can't guarantee that it's going to be a permanent connection for the building. When we're talking about structural steel, that's normally considered permanent, because you're going to have to make some major changes to be able to change that structural steel, so it's considered far more permanent than standard service pipe work. So that's why we don't need that same enhanced requirement of a continuous conductor, and you might actually be able to use the steel pipe work, the structural steel itself as a bonding conductor. So if you can verify through measurement that the structural steel is continuous within the building, then rather than having to bond all 7 of them, you would only need to bond the first one, and then just make note that they are electrically continuous by their physical construction, and you are relying on that. So then that makes the responsible person for the building aware, and if they do make any structural changes to those steel columns, they would have to consider the continuity of your bonding requirements. Anything you'd add on that, Dan?
I think you nailed that spot on, Sam. I think, it's fantastic. No, structural steel, a lot of the time that I've had my experience, provides a very, very, very good path to earth, obviously, pole to the ground. You know, the size of the CSM of the steelwork alone, is a lot greater. Even if you use the ratio of 8:1 compared to copper, you're going to get a lot better path than even if you did put the sort of 50mm bond. Even sometimes, the structural steel will still be better sometimes in some instances. So that's spot on. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, we've got another engineer, I think, answering previous engineers' questions. So saying about utility companies do have guidance on the DNO BNO example. So that's kind of following up, and we would agree with that. That it's a good place to get those DNO and BNO definitions. Another question: can an earth electrode on a TT system be located indoors down through the concrete street? Absolutely, yes, and in fact there are a lot of advantages by doing it indoors, in that it's usually easier to maintain, easier to access during test and inspection, future processes, and so rather than it being hidden outside and people forgetting where it is, it can be more regularly labelled and identified. So there's nothing that says an earth electrode has to be physically outside, and in a lot of instances there are advantages of it being inside.
I think as well is this risk of it being damaged or tampered with as well. Sometimes internally, I've done many inspections where you go check the electrode and either the cable's disconnected, and it's been like that for many years. No one's actually realised. So again, if it is internal, again, it's got its pros and cons, but as I said, there's nothing that says it has to be outside the actual premises itself.
I would. One thing I would suggest is just ensure that you have got a good measurement, because sometimes I don't want to offend any builders that might actually be in the audience tonight, but sometimes people tend to chuck all sorts of stuff underneath the property, knowing that it's going to be covered up and never seen. So you might not get the best soil, and if you haven't got the best soil, you might not get the best low resistance path. So just check on your values. Don't assume everywhere inside you're going to get as good a value as you would do away from the property where you haven't been impacted by the building program. Okay, yeah, someone mentioning about about distances from the sink. Yes, there is some guidance in the IET's Electrician's Guide to the Regs, but as you say, that is only guidance. It's not a regulatory requirement. On a temp site supply, of the supply is TNCS. Should a TT supply be incorporated, and will you still TT the supply if it wasn't TNS? A temp site supply, if the supply is TNS, should a TT supply be incorporated, and would you still? No. If if you verify that your TNS supply is adequate for you to achieve disconnection times, if your earth fault path is adequate and it's what you would expect, so you've got some typical maximum guidance values that you can follow, but there's nothing that says I've reread the question. TNCS, yes, whereas I've been reading it in my head as TNS. Sorry, so TNCS, yeah, TNCS prohibited on construction site because of the danger of us having structural steel, as we talked about earlier, popping up during part of the building process, and therefore it's very difficult to maintain that equipotential zone without you introducing extraneous conductive parts which can then be simultaneously touched. So yeah, in that instance where the site supply originally was TNCS, then we would recommend one way of doing that would be to TT it, as at the end of your question, as you say, if the supply wasn't TNS, we'd consider maintaining it as TT at least during that construction process, until you've achieved a situation where you might be able to create an equipotential zone, because now you haven't got a mixture of internal and external work going on. So yeah, it brings me back to my college days of read the question, although there used to be some extra letters and words put in.
It's been a long day, Sam. It's okay.
Okay. Topical question. I'm gonna try and answer it. Should all circuits be aimed to be covered by RCBOs as opposed to MCB split boards domestically usually? Okay, as we speak, split boards are still considered to provide a degree of division of installation, because ultimately that's what we're coming down to. There's a set of regulations around section 314 that talk about dividing the installation to minimise inconvenience in the event of a fault. Now, small installation, most typical domestic installations, you can actually get sufficient division to make sure that you've got a mixture, say, upstairs lights with downstairs sockets, or front of house lights with back of house sockets, so that you'll always have a power source even if you lose one half due to a fault. Ultimately, RCBOs on every circuit will give you a better division of installation, but a dual board isn't currently prohibited, because it does give you a degree. But it's down to then you as a designer, based on the size of your installation, how it's going to be used, who it's going to be used by, for you to feel does it give sufficient division of installation, and in which case you may choose to go the RCBA route, which of course will give you the best division of installation, because now a single fault will only affect that circuit and will not affect any other circuit within the installation. Would you add anything to that one, Dan?
Carry out a survey, really look at the impact. As you say, the regulations still permit the use of a dual RCD board. Again, in certain smaller installations, you'll find that you can minimise the inconvenience to a degree, as you say. But RCBOs are my personal preferred method, but that's just my preference. But again, you might find contractually on some jobs you might have to put RCBOs on every single circuit, but where you've got a standard sort of domestic installation where there might be that sort of level involved, then yeah. But if you have got things to consider though, with COVID as well, a lot more people working from home. So if you are doing a rewire and you have got home offices, for example, you might want to consider putting those on separate RCPO circuits where there is a higher degree of earth leakage current for IT equipment. So things to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people have said later on that, you know, they they choose to always use RCBOs, don't like split boards. Yeah, you know, it's a designer preference, and I think, you know, it's based on the size of the installation, very much so. We've also had another question that's a follow-on from before. So engineers asked, you can use, I think this is when we were talking about not being able to do a full test due to no supply. You can use the incoming supply ZE with your R1 plus R2 values to give ZS. Yes, you can. So yeah, if during those dead test phases you do your R1 plus R2, and then when the supply is installed, then you can do your ZE. Then you can add them together. This is where we were talking about it could save you time by doing what you can at a dead test phase, but ultimately you'd want a supply to do things like check functionality of RCDs, for example, and do a ZE. So you need the supply for that. So this is where we were coming from, that you do need it ultimately to complete your testing for to ensure safety for continued use. Installers splitting the supply cables at the meter cabinet and taking 10mm tails to feed a subboard for an EV point, with the main fuse being 80 to 100 amp. Although it's a 32 amp load for the charger, what's your thoughts on not using 1625mm tails? Does it just come down to using the adiabatic equation? Well, it's the adiabatic would help you size the CPC, but in terms of size in the line and neutral conductors, that's really down to demand. And there is, you know, there's guidance that tells us, there's a regulation that tells us we can omit overload protection, providing we ensure that that those conductors aren't going to be overloaded by the device. Now if we're running tails directly to the EV charger, and then within the EV charger there's a 32 amp overcurrent protective device such as a breaker, then that will provide adequate overload protection, providing there's no branches in between that point where the size of the tails are reduced. It's one of those other things as well that, if you think about it, overload protection is one of those situations where it can be anywhere in the circuit, providing there are no branches. You know, it doesn't have to be at the origin. A lot of people think about, you know, we're used to putting protective devices at the origin, which is typically for fault protection. When it comes to overload and overload only, it can be anywhere along that line. So if the only thing on those reduced sized tails, the 10mm tails, is the vehicle charger, then the 32 amp overcurrent protective device for those 10mm tails can be within the charger. It doesn't have to be at the point where effectively you've changed from 16 or 25mm incoming tails to 10mm tails for the charger. But this is something that we're seeing a lot now, isn't it? EV charging really taking off, people splitting the supply and supplying either a separate board or just supplying the charging equipment directly. Okay, should be individual as discrimination comes out into play, but most use split board. I think, yeah, that was another engineer talking about, can we still use dual split boards? Yeah, we can, but you know, there's no doubt about it, individual RCBOs give you a better division of installation. And a colleague of mine have said, if it's a correct British standard, we can add it to the drop down list. So there you go. I think that's referring back to the gentleman who was talking about his Luden. So that's the right man on the job there, definitely. Thanks for that. In an LV submain MCCB, would use a 3-pole or 4-pole MCCB in a TNCS system. Okay, so there's not a requirement. So if we've got a TN system, so TNCS or TN, ultimately the neutral within that supply system is going to be referenced to Earth at some point within the distribution network. And so BS7671 says if that's the case, we can actually rely on just isolation for the 3 line conductors. So yeah, if we have got a TNS or TNCS system, we can rely on 3-pole isolation. You can still use 4-pole to give you that enhanced requirement, but it's not actually a regulatory requirement. You can get away with is not the right term. It's fully compliant to just have a 3-pole device. Okay, once again we've gone mad on time. We'll see if we can pick up another couple just before we finish. Problem with split dual RCD boards is that I'm seeing them on new builds. Okay, then they have safety circuits on them, which means smoke's on the same RCD as power, therefore not compliant with 583.6.6. So fire alarm reg, which suggests that you want to try and avoid RCD protection on a shared basis, because we don't want our safety circuits being turned off and batteries being drained by a fault on another circuit. Okay, let's have a look. We'll look for a last one which lines up with that. Is a domestic smoke alarm system considered a safety service, Dan? What's your thoughts?
Yes. I think go to another unused part of the regulations, part 2 definitions. The definition of a safety service is electrical system for electrical equipment provided to protect or warn persons in the event of a hazard or essential to their evacuation from a location. So yes, it is called safety service. So yeah, definitions is a part that I often ask contractors to refer to, because there's a lot of words in that definitions part 2 that I don't think I've very, very well looked at, but when you sort of read certain regulations, you pick up certain words, by going to definition does help you understand that regulation better as well. I find it more in depth. But yeah, in answer to the question, yes. Yeah,
absolutely. And so that's then, we need to consider it, because the definition says it's any electrical system that provides or protects or warns people in the event of a hazard or is essential to their evacuation. So that kind of pretty on both counts confirms that we would consider fire alarms in that area. Okay, I've got to apologise, we've overrun again, but that's only really because some great questions tonight, and so thank you very much if you've got your question in. Apologies if you haven't had your question answered. We will try and get round to that next time. So yeah, please do keep sending them in. We said we'd follow up a few, so I think one of my colleagues who's in the audience tonight has said that we can look at adding that missing BSEN to the drop downs in the online certificates, and also we can see if we have got definitions in any of our publications around BNOs and DNOs. I just want to make you aware of some things that we've got coming up. So on our Wednesday night webinar series, the next one next week is on the subject of maximum demand. They'll run every 2 weeks on a Wednesday, so we're trying to alternate it so that you'll have something to watch or view and take part in each week. So this week it's a Q&A, next week it will be a webinar on maximum demand. That's available to register on our site right now, as are the 2 following ones in February and beginning of March. We've got the one at the end of February, slight break from a technical subject, but we're talking about managing mental health and well-being of yourselves, of your staff. So just as important as the good technical stuff that we regularly talk about. And then at the beginning of March, we're going to have a bit of a quiz, trying to have a pub quiz with electrical only questions, not something we've not tried before. So please do give that a look. So again, all 3 webinars are available for you to register your interest in. And just want to say, we've not got a webinar in a fortnight because it's Valentine's night, so we thought people would be off doing other things. It's also half term in lots of the parts of the country, so the next Q&A is actually in 4 weeks' time on Monday the 28th. We hope to see you then. So it just leaves us to say thank you very much for tonight from myself and Dan. Again, it's always the quickest 40 minutes of our life, isn't it, Dan?
Do you know what? I love these. I think it's great. Again, it's great getting the questions in from everyone. Sharing information is key. I'm a firm believer of sharing information. Every day is a school day. But no, thanks for all the questions, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, I'll look forward to tuning in 4 weeks' time, Sam, myself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you again. Just once more, if we didn't get round to answer your question tonight, I do apologise, and we'll post them up for the start of the next session. So thank you very much.
Take care.